Hello and welcome back to the Patient First Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Laskin. And as always, I'm excited that you're here, that you're a member of the engaged dental community. And especially today, we have a great guest. We have Ryan Mingus, who is the managing director at TUSK Practice Sales. He has over 15 years of healthcare M&A consulting experience and has completed over 650 million in transactions during his time at TUSK. Ryan, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Doc.
You must be like at the center point, the fulcrum of some of the biggest changes in dentistry, right? The M&A activity has been going crazy over the last, and so it's a very interesting spot to be. So you must be a very busy guy.
Yeah, it's picked up a lot of pace. Even in the 5 years that I've been at TUSK, I've been in the dental industry long before that. But just during my time within the dental world, how fast and how feverish this consolidation trend has taken hold, and then also how much is left to go, right? How long the runway still is. It's really incredible, and certainly keeps everybody in our organization busy and constantly looking to add new headcount to it in order to keep up.
Yeah, I just had breakfast with somebody today who said, boy, the group practice space is about a third of the industry right now. And if you're talking about like corporate groups, and they said, how high is it going to be, Brian? Do you think it'll get 50%? I'm like, I think it's going to be over 70%, frankly. I don't know if your thoughts are. Let me ask you, where do you think things are going?
Yeah, I think we like to use like the baseball analogy in terms of innings. I think that we probably are in the fourth or fifth inning of this. And then it's at the end of it, what does full consolidation mean in the world of dentistry? We're really certain that relative to other elements of healthcare, dentistry will always have a place for private ownership and private practice. There are different pressures in the healthcare world where I came from, hospital systems, surgery centers, all of that, because of insurance payers that are driving that consolidation. There aren't the same pressures in dental. We think full consolidation is actually right around the number you had mentioned, which is 70-75% of all practices one day will be affiliated with a group. Then comes a definition. Is a DSO have to be private equity backed? Could it be a privately backed or debt funded group? I like to define a DSO as one that is private equity backed, and then those that are non-private equity backed, we just call them group practices. So I think that 75% would include both DSOs and group practices.
Yeah, that's where I think things are headed. And I do predictions every year now. And one of my predictions for 2024 this year was that it was a great time to be a group practice that was dentist owned because the capital markets have gotten tighter. It's harder to do the sort of, if you don't know how to grow a practice, it's harder to buy more practices, aggregate them and sell them. So I feel like for the dentist owners who actually know how to grow a practice, and I don't say that being critical of consolidators either, there's a place for both, but I feel like at this moment in time, if you are somebody who's grown a small group of dental practices, it's a fantastic time to be in that spot because the over levered PE DSOs are probably having a little bit harder of time. And I think that's a good opportunity for those groups that are run by people who understand like dentistry, not just business. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, true dental operators, this was their time to shine. It was an opportunity for them to leverage all of the skills and all the learnings that they've gone through in going from 1 to 5 to 6 locations, 10 locations, whatever it is. Those true operators, debt funded, this was their opportunity to shine in the headwinds of inflation and the Great Resignation and all these other things that the headwinds that the dental world has been experiencing over the past 24 months or so. And then DSOs, that's just not really a muscle that a lot of them developed. Now, some of them absolutely have that muscle, but the majority of them grew exactly how you had mentioned, which is through M&A. And they have pressures to grow. And in a high interest rate environment, a rising interest rate environment, it's more difficult for them to do effective and high volume mergers and acquisitions. So they've had to build the muscle of organic growth and operating on the businesses and growing them organically, because they're not able to get as many deals done in this environment. I think those operators truly were, it was absolutely their day in the sun for sure.
So you use the term was, and so do you think we're coming out of that now?
I think that I think that a lot of these DSOs spent the last 12 months to 18 months developing that muscle. So I think that they're caught up, not all of them, but a lot of them, they're focused on organic growth, they're focused on same store sales, EBITDA growth, all of that. I think that they're still going to be behind, but I do think that they have committed to growing in that manner and in kind of that subsidizing their growth along with M&A is picking back up.
Okay. Yeah, because, so do you see there being more M&A happening then in the near future?
I do. I've also seen some of these private backed group or debt funded groups be more competitive against a DSO when competing to acquire a client of ours. They can get a little bit more creative in deal structure. The equity that they have can be perceived as more valuable than a DSO. I think that there's actually a little bit more parity with respect to debt funded groups versus private equity funded groups right now, which is an interesting time. It broadens the buyer pool for our clients that they get to explore. So yeah,
I just got to say, I mentioned this before, but to you, but I should say it on the podcast that I went through my own sale of my practices, and I did not talk to enough DSOs and groups, and I did it on my own. I had an attorney, but
sure.
I didn't use somebody like Tusk, and I wish I had, because I think that so I'd like you to talk about how you do what you do, because I think it's a great service that, in fact, just yesterday I was talking to a dentist who's looking at selling his practice. And man, even though I was saying I could tell that he was resistant to talk to multiple people, I would like to you have this open forum to talk about like how you do what you do to match the buyers and sellers, because I think it's an important service that not enough dentists explore when they're looking at selling their practice or practices.
Sure. Yeah. Taking a step back from what we do specific, like our process specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit more broadly around the fact that what we do is lower middle market mergers and acquisitions. We're sell side advisors. Some call it an investment bank, some call it a boutique investment bank. And what we do is very different than what the traditional doctor to doctor broker did or does currently. It just so happens that we are specifically focused on dentistry and healthcare. But that being said, there are investment banks out there. So anybody that wants to sell their business, if it's an HVAC business, if it's a restaurant, if it's a car wash business, it doesn't matter. There are investment bankers that do what Tusk does available to them. And literally in every other industry, you hire somebody to help sell your business. It's just for whatever reason in dentistry, dentists are averse to it and they can't really wrap their mind around it initially. So and I do agree there is an aversion that doctors think that they don't need to hire somebody. Maybe it's because they think that it costs money. I don't know what it is, but the reality is in every other industry, like what we do is standard operating procedure for anybody that wants to sell their business, just flat out. So it is interesting. We've noticed that as well. But what we do, our role is specifically to help an individual owner or group of owners fully explore the market and understand every single thing that is available to them if they are interested in the next phase of practice, whether that be a glide path to retirement as quickly as possible and selling the business and getting out of the business as quickly as they can, or partnering with a DSO that will allow them to continue to practice in a different manner with less administrative burdens, help realize some growth that lives in the business, and benefit from that through equity mechanisms of the deal, or in some instances, create their own DSO. So we've had plenty of clients were of such size and scale that they warranted direct investment from a private equity group. And in which case, once they closed their deal, they became a DSO, and now we're an acquirer of businesses and ultimately on the buy side and opposite of us, which is really exciting and fun to watch that unfold. So our job is to make sure that whomever we represent has an opportunity to explore the myriad of buyers that exist out there. There are over 100 plus private equity backed groups out there. And then there are a bunch of debt funded groups that can, in some instances, be competitive in going out and acquiring practices as well. So we make sure that our clients see the entirety of the market. So we do the hard work in going out there and sifting through all of them and then bringing back a subset of that group of that list of buyers that we went to start a conversation and get them access to the information that we compiled and curated on behalf of our client. So in a nutshell, that is like the high arching overview of what we do and why it's valuable to our clients is that you really have no idea where any buyer is at any given time. These DSOs go through ebbs and flows of buying versus holding and buying versus growing. And if you catch the right group on the right day, the valuation that they paid you on that day could have been 50% higher than what it would have been if you had talked to that buyer 6 months ago. So our job is to make sure that our clients see all of those and catch the hot hand at the right time. Now, do they ultimately always take that highest offer? No, but at least by going through this process, that's the only way that you can be certain to maximize the valuation that you're able to achieve.
Yeah, and I just from my experience and from talking with lots of dentists, it's not just getting the valuation, like you said, it's the deal terms, which is a huge piece of it. The devil is definitely in the details when you're selling your practice or practices, and then maintenance of the deal throughout. I know we've talked about this before. That one trick is to say this is the value of your practice, but then as you're going through the due diligence, it's an opportunity if you don't have somebody on your side for the deal to erode with time because once you get bought in and like you're going to be selling your practice. So could you speak a little bit to that too?
Yeah, so getting it out. So first off, anybody can negotiate the highest number, but very few people can negotiate the highest floor. So you could go out there and just keep asking for the highest top line number, but how they structure the deal ultimately decides where the floor is on your deal. And our job is to not only negotiate the highest ceiling, but also the highest floor to make sure that you're protected as much as possible. That's in the post-close deal terms that we're negotiating. But I think to what you're asking is more like once you sign that LOI and the third-party quality of earnings comes in and the lawyers come out, how are you going to make sure that the deal that you signed in that LOI gets realized at the closing table? And I think these groups have armies of analysts that work internally. They hire third-party accounting firms to conduct the quality of earnings because the bank requires that it's a third party. These DSOs, yes, they're private equity backed, but they use debt, just debt funded groups do, to help juice the returns to their LPs by not using pure equity on every deal that they do. So as such, when it comes time to do that quality of earnings to validate the EBITDA that they bid off of, that's an opportunity for some tricks to come out on the buy side. They can hide behind that quality of earnings firm and say, I'm sorry, it's the third party. They said that this expense, it went up since the period, and we've got to decrease the EBITDA that we're bidding off of, which means the enterprise value that we previously negotiated has to be lowered. And it's an opportunity for them to start taking greater and greater control of the situation and the narrative and ultimately the deal terms that become more favorable to the buyer than to the seller.
We talked a little bit about dentists are and one of the reasons why we're talking about a lot about valuation is because it's what I think um, you know it's a top of mind when people who are selling their practices, right? And when it comes to valuation, I want to maybe this is stating the obvious, but one of the reasons why practices sell to DSOs is because they get the highest valuation there. Do you see a large delta between not just you already said it, like the same if the same DSO 1 month later might give you 50% more or 50% less for your practice. That across the whole industry, that's going to the variability in valuation. It seems like it's a bit bonkers. Whether you sell to an individual dentist or you sell to a PE group or you sell to a small local group, or what I mean, so how would you recommend figuring like if someone's listening, maybe they have a couple practices, maybe they have a single practice that's big, and they're thinking, how do I navigate this space, right? Evaluation. What tips do you have for them?
Yeah, I think obviously you need somebody that knows the entire buyer landscape. It's never been broader. And if you think about it, some of these groups, the group that you sold to was publicly traded at some point in time 20 years ago, right? So
Mhm.
you've got groups that have been around for 20 plus years. You've got groups that have been around for 20 days, and there are new groups being formed all the time. So the first and foremost is obviously it's very self-serving, but it's also logical. You need to hire somebody that understands and knows all of the marketplace. Let that group get to know you. Let them educate you on what's available to the market, and then let's craft an efficient pathway forward on how we're going to steward ourselves through this process together. Your timeline might be different than someone else's timeline. If you've got all the time in the world, that's a good thing. We want to take stock on what the business is today. And maybe the answer that we give you is, okay, you need to address this and this in your business, and let's talk again in 6 months because it could be exponentially worth it. So most of the time it starts with a conversation and a complimentary valuation study that we do for someone. And then we show them how the playbook is written. And then they go back and work on their business for a bit. And then we come back to the table and we prepare the business to go to market in a manner. So we're putting the best foot forward when we go to market, and we're working the buy side in a way that we mutually agreed upon it. You told me what you wanted, what you didn't want. I'm going to challenge you on some of those things because it's my job to make sure that you go a little bit broader than you probably thought you wanted to, because I want to make sure you didn't leave any stone unturned. But first step is understand where your business is today, where the market is for your business today, and then if now is the right time. And oftentimes it's not. Like very rarely does somebody come to me and they say, hey, I want to go to market, or they say I want to sell. We show them what the valuation looks like, where the market's at for that. And then they start to see how the game is played and they want to go back and refine things. And that's fine. We welcome that and we'll help them in that process. But you got to hire somebody that's going to help represent you and then survey the market and then run an efficient process that's going to put you in the driver's seat of getting coached up prior to these meetings, understanding the landscape, and then having fun along the way, getting to know these. It shouldn't be a high stress environment. A lot of people come to me that have an LOI in hand and they're like, they told me I have to sign this within 48 hours or else it's going to go away. Like, you should never sell your practice under that type of duress. That's our job, is to make sure that it's as low stress as possible and as fun as it should be, because you're selling your life's work.
I can tell you from my experience, it was not fun nor low stress. It was one of the more highest stress of my times. And I've had multiple exits now from software platforms and learned a lot. And what I learned the most is that I should not have done it alone. Not only, and we talked a lot about valuation on the podcast, but there's also just having somebody to bounce off to know what you want. Like now I know that I never want to be actively working a business I don't have a controlling interest in, right? Doesn't mean that so what that means for me is that I wouldn't want to be actively working in a business that I don't have controlling interest in. Now that's not true of everybody. It's true of me.
Right.
But also to your point too, that like this does not need to be like you doing it alone and stressed out and like having to deal with all of the data room requests and all of this stuff. I would highly recommend the for people that are looking at making a transition like this that have not had a ton of experience doing it to reach out to you guys, because I just feel like it is, it's something that I look, if I could go back and rewind, one of the only pieces of advice that I can think of, I would give well, that's not true. There's probably a lot of advice I'd give younger Brian, but one of the pieces of advice would be when going through a transaction of selling a business, don't do it alone, right? So yeah. So Ryan, thanks for what you do. Where can people go to find more information about you and about Tusk?
Sure. Yeah, we've got a wealth of information. We kind of market through education. So our website has a plethora of webinars, blogs, downloadable documents that kind of help people get prepared and get educated on what's going on. Our website is www.tuskpracticesales.com. So on that, we've got just a whole bunch of information and ability for folks to book meetings directly with us and contact us via methods on the website.
Great. So we'll put a link around this video too for people that want to know more information. Go to tuskpracticesales.com. Thanks again for being on the podcast, Ryan.
All right. Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.